It's that time of the year again. It's time to see what my coaster rankings look like now. What's up guys, Dr. Coaster here and welcome back to another video on the channel. Today we will be looking at my top 25 coasters as of the end of 2022. Before we dig into this list, if you haven't already, be sure to drop the video a like as it helps me fight the YouTube algorithm. While you're at it, subscribe to the channel as well for more roller coaster and theme park content just like this. This year I visited Carowinds, Dollywood, Six Flags Over Georgia, Kings Island, Cedar Point, Universal Orlando Resort, SeaWorld Orlando, Busch Gardens Tampa, and the 3 Fun Spot parks. The parks I visited this year include all the parks I've also visited since becoming an enthusiast, so I got back everywhere this year. So if there's a coaster not on this list that you're expecting to see, I probably haven't ridden it yet. To give you an idea of what my rankings looked like last year, here's a quick look at my top 10 from 2021. I had only ridden 59 coasters as of the end of 2021, so I rode 40 new coasters this year. I was aiming for far more, but I ended up living in Central Florida for a while, so I can't really complain. Notable coasters just missing the cut, in no particular order, include Kumba and Shikra at Busch Gardens Tampa, Raptor and Valraven at Cedar Point, and Screaming Eagle at Fun Spot Atlanta. Even though I've only ridden 99 coasters, I don't have a ton of filler, so this was definitely a fun challenge to keep track of throughout the year as I visited many new parks for the first time and returned to some of my favorites. With that out of the way, let's get into this with the first hybrid coaster to make this list. Number 25 is Gemini at Cedar Point. I count this as 2 credits, but we'll just be ranking it as 1 for the sake of this video. I had heard a lot of people talk about how underrated this coaster was going in, but I just wasn't too sure about it. It ended up being loaded with airtime, was super smooth, and became my favorite aero coaster in the park. So yes, Magnum won't be on this list. We're ripping the band-aid off already. Number 24 is Wild Eagle at Dollywood. This is my first wing coaster, and it's a coaster I hear get a lot of hate that I just don't quite understand. I find that the first drop is some great airtime and actually pulls some serious forces. I gray out pulling out of the first drop quite often. And then the views of the park and the surrounding Smoky Mountains are just jaw-dropping. Wild Eagle really rounds up Dollywood's stacked lineup well, and I can't wait to ride it again. Number 23 is Mindbender at Six Flags Over Georgia. And before you get too confused by this placement, know that this is the original Mindbender, not the hunk of junk only runs 1 of 3 trains, refurbished, sits on the mid-course brake, shell of itself form, that now sits at the park. That version of the ride isn't even ranked in my top 50. Original Mindbender, however, was my first inverting coaster, so there's definitely a sentimental component to this ranking. Those Schwarzkopf loops built into a terrain coaster were top tier. The forces were great and even had some airtime. It was running well up until the day it left us, and I miss it dearly. Six Flags, you done messed up. And you better not do this to Shockwave. Number 22 is Icebreaker at SeaWorld Orlando. This has been slipping in my rankings a little bit, but it's honestly all about those cramped Premier trains and comfort collars more than anything. This is just one of those plain fun coasters for me, with a few great moments of airtime built into the shuttle layout along the water. It's a must ride for me while I'm at SeaWorld Orlando, and it's joined by a couple other rides later on this list. Number 21 is Cheetah Hunt at Busch Gardens Tampa. I had to wait almost an entire year to ride this coaster after it went down for maintenance on my first visit to the park. It still remains one of my favorites in the park with incredible views and some solid launches. That one airtime hill later in the ride also packs a serious punch in the back row. If Cheetah Hunt had better restraints than whatever the heck it currently has, it would most likely rank even higher on this list. Number 20 is Gatekeeper at Cedar Point. This was the first coaster I rode during my visit to the park this past summer, and wow, was it just purely enjoyable and quite honestly, relaxing. You'll definitely notice a trend of coasters with a view on this list, and the view of Lake Erie and Cedar Point as a whole from Gatekeeper is no exception. The wing over drop and passes through the keyholes are definitely the highlights of the ride for me, and the way it welcomes guests to the park is just a perfect fit, and it definitely serves as one of my favorite entrances out there. Number 19 is Revenge of the Mummy at Universal Studios Florida. This is the coaster that kinda started it all for me. It recently got refurbished, and the launch doesn't quite feel like it has the same punch that it used to. But the theming is some of the most elaborate out there, and the quotes are something even my non-enthusiast friends throw around from time to time. Mummy continues to slide down my rankings the more I go on new coasters, but a sentimental appeal is still there, and it has its place in my top 25. Number 18 is Manta at SeaWorld Orlando. I'm normally not one for flying coasters, they're just not quite my cup of tea, but the way that Manta performs justifies this ranking. The pretzel loop is probably the most intense element I've experienced thus far in my coaster journey. Positive G's aren't really my thing, but I can totally appreciate the pretzel loop for what it is. The rest of Manta is full of swooping low to the ground, flying through rockwork, and over the water. These moments are fantastic and make the entire ride for me. Oh, and don't forget about the fountain. You might get a little wet. Okay, now have fun sitting on a brake run. That's probably the worst part of the ride. Number 17 is Hollywood Rip Ride Rocket at Universal Studios Florida. This really climbed in my rankings this year. At first glance, this seemed overrated on my list even to my own eyes. But the night rides I got during Halloween Horror Nights were chock full of just ridiculous amounts of airtime that I wasn't expecting. The constant braking is definitely annoying, but being able to select your own music is also an awesome feature. There's not really any other rides out there that let you do something quite like that. Number 16 is Thunderhead at Dollywood. This is a coaster that I've ridden 2 to 3 times now, but I don't feel like I have quite a good enough feel for it yet. I'll be returning to Dollywood next year at least once, and aside from riding Big Bear Mountain, getting multiple re-rides on this world-class GCI is at the top of my list. I remember it getting much smoother following the additional track work that Dollywood gave it, and I remember getting belted out of my seat multiple times. Thunderhead is a coaster that has the potential to move up in my rankings next year following my return to the park, for sure. Number 15. Number 15 is Montu at Busch Gardens Tampa. Along with the flying coasters, B&M inverts aren't really my thing either, but I just can't get enough of Montu. This coaster is 26 years old now and runs like it's brand new. I wish you could say the same about myself. The new paint job definitely did it no favors appearance-wise, but I'm so happy to have this coaster in my backyard for the temporary future. The inversions don't cause my head to bang against the over-the-shoulder restraint, and the positive G's are just right for me on this ride. Not to mention the ride-ops aren't like Batman, who literally jump up and down to staple you to the back of your seat. So you can have a pain-free ride. Oh yeah, and those trenches do something for the ride too that just take it to the next level. I'll see you next week, Montu. Number 14 is Twisted Cyclone at Six Flags Over Georgia. Even though this is at my home park, I don't get to ride it nearly as often as I want to due to the frustratingly slow operations. During one of my last visits to the park, I experienced a 10-minute cycle. Yes, 10 minutes. Operations aside though, this is a smaller RMC that still packs a serious punch. The drop in the back is one of the strongest I've experienced regardless of its size, and that wave turn and ejector hill fling you from your seat unlike many other coasters around. Sure, it definitely had more potential, but an RMC is still an RMC for me. Smooth as glass and loaded with violent airtime, just the way I like it. Number 13 is Millennium Force at Cedar Point. The original Giga Coaster was incredibly enjoyable for me, but it's definitely been passed up by many other coasters out there. At least in my opinion. It's got airtime, it's got incredible speed, and it's got some amazing views. I certainly wish it was more reliable during my visit as it went down multiple times. Once with me in the train, but alas, I'm still a big fan. And similar to Thunderhead, I feel like this is the coaster I need a few more rides on. However, I just don't see it climbing much higher in my rankings. I'm just incredibly grateful for the monster coasters that it helped inspire in the years following it. Number 12 is Diamondback at Kings Island. I initially had Diamondback ranked higher than another B&M hyper on this list, but decided that 12 was the best place for it. This coaster had some serious bite and excellent operations, and if you want the most airtime possible, this coaster is tough to beat. I just found the rattle to be kind of annoying. I know that's kind of common with the Kings Island coasters, but it was enough for me to put 11 other incredible coasters ahead of it. To this day, Diamondback might have the most floater airtime of any coaster on this list, and I can't wait to get back to Kings Island to marathon their top 3. Speaking of their top 3, number 11 is Mystic Timbers, also at Kings Island. It's really not fair that these two coasters sit right next to each other in the same section of the park. I went on a day when the park wasn't super busy, and I was just lapping them back to back to back to my heart's content. Mystic Timbers is the coaster that really opened my mind to wooden coasters. I had had some iffy experiences to say the least with the older version of Great American Scream Machine and Mindblower. So Mystic Timbers was a welcomed relief full of incredible airtime. GCI makes some incredible coasters, and I really hope we get one in Georgia soon. Looking at you, Fun Spot. Number 10 is Hagrid's Magical Creature Motorbike Adventure at Islands of Adventure. Awesome. I said that in one take. The coaster's name itself is as epically long as the ride experience too. And the line. Yeah. Yikes. I definitely recommend visiting Universal Orlando during the off-season for this one. Hagrids is full of some of the most immersive theming on the planet, and a night ride through the Forbidden Forest is incredible. Throw in multiple launches, a vertical spike, a drop track, and more, and you've got a world-class coaster that is just pure fun that the whole family can enjoy. This is one of those rides that just makes me smile the entire time, and it deserves a spot in my top 10. Number 9 is Mako at SeaWorld Orlando. Just around the corner from Hagrids is Mako, and one of these days I'll probably ride both on the same day like I have with many other coasters ranked highly on this list. Mako is a B&M hyper filled with some of the greatest floater airtime on the planet, and it's a coaster that once held my number 1 spot for a short period of time. That 5-second airtime hill is still up there in what is probably my top 3 favorite elements on any coaster. The views from, and the theme of Orlando's tallest roller coaster are also a nice touch. Mako was my favorite B&M hyper up until just a couple weeks ago, when I finally gave in and ranked the next coaster on the list just 1 spot higher. Number 8 is Goliath at Six Flags Over Georgia. Now, I definitely have a bit of a love-hate relationship for this coaster, or at least the park it's located in. When I'm able to set those feelings aside and just focus on the coaster itself, Mako and Goliath honestly ping-pong back and forth a little bit as my favorite hypercoaster, but I got a few rides towards the end of this year that sealed it for now. I can't take positive forces incredibly well. Look no further than my Goliath marathon vlog for proof of that, but Goliath during the winter had the perfect balance for me. Strong floater, positive G's, violent ejector. Goliath had it all. One of the ride ops was also being forgiving with the stapling, so I was getting flung all over the place. I had some enthusiast friends in town from California at the time, and they absolutely loved it, having never experienced a B&M hyper before. I'll soon return to Florida and Six Flags Over Georgia, so I'll be interested to see how my opinion changes. Goliath takes my number 1 hyper spot for now, and locks itself into my number 8 overall spot. Number 7 is Orion at Kings Island. Orion was my second of 3 Giga coasters that I rode this year, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. It definitely has some deader spots like people say, but I found it to be more intense than people have said as well. The first drop is still incredible, and those B&M clamshell restraints really shine. Anytime a coaster hits 90 plus miles per hour is typically a good time, and when it is as glass smooth as Orion is, it just makes it that much more enjoyable. Here's hoping it stays that way. Looking over Kings Island at sunset to help me round out my first visit to the park is a memory I'll always remember, and I can't wait to get back on this beast of a coaster again soon. Number 6 is Lightning Rod at Dollywood. I unfortunately never got to experience the original version of Lightning Rod, as I had to cancel my first trip to Dollywood the week COVID hit. But I returned in 2021 and 2022, and I've now ridden it nearly 20 times. I definitely wish the launch had a little more punch to hurl you over the top of the lift, but the coaster still maintains an incredible pace regardless. The way Lightning Rod disappears behind the mountain is unlike any other coaster experience I've had, and the same goes for the quad down, as it absolutely hurls you back down the mountain you just dropped back behind. Typical RMC ejector airtime here, and I couldn't ask for anything more in that regard. Lightning Rod does have a pothole or two, but you can easily know when those are coming after you've ridden it once and brace yourself accordingly. Obviously, Lightning Rod also isn't the most reliable coaster on the face of the earth, but when it is running, it's running well. Running well enough to land at number 6 in my overall rankings. Number 5 is Maverick at Cedar Point. I missed out on Maverick my first day at Cedar Point due to maintenance issues, but I was able to get 2 rides the following morning thanks to Coaster Mania's ERT. I got off of my first ride in the middle row somewhere and knew that it was a great ride, but I was lucky enough to get assigned the back row on my next ride and it blew me away. It probably has the best snap of any coaster I've ridden, and likely the most intense launch as well. The way you get yanked over the first drop is also a ton of fun. Maverick isn't the tallest coaster by any means, but its layout is non-stop chaos, and I wish it wasn't so far from home. Number 4 is Fury 325 at Carowinds, a coaster that isn't too far from home, and at a park that I was able to get to twice this year. I have ridden Fury in the mid-40s when it's raining, and when it's scorching hot out, and both were absolutely relentless. Fury 325 easily has the greatest floater airtime of any first drop in the world, and then has some of the most consistent speed the remainder of the way. This was the first Giga coaster that I had ever ridden, and it's one of those coasters that just causes me to involuntarily yell out of pure thrill. I hope one day that I can experience a trimless ride to see how much more the second half hits. There's not much more I can say about Fury 325, it's just a pure masterpiece at every turn. Number 3 is Steel Vengeance at Cedar Point. Long the undisputed king is many people's number 1 coaster. Steel Vengeance managed to snag my number 2 spot initially, but it eventually dropped a single spot to number 3. This wasn't because it did anything wrong though, because Steel Vengeance is just one of the greatest coasters ever built or converted. The first drop is lethal, the Outer Bank to airtime hill is phenomenal, and the airtime seemingly never ends. I don't believe I got a front or back row ride while I was up at Cedar Point, so I definitely need to get back to see how it compares to the remaining 2 coasters on my list. I love a long ride, as long as it doesn't drag on, and Steel Vengeance fits that bill perfectly. Alan Shilke did it again with Steel Vengeance, but he did design one more coaster that I found to be even more relentless. Number 2 is Iron Gwazi, located at Busch Gardens, Tampa. I had a bad first experience with Iron Gwazi after it went down for nearly half the day and only yielded me 3 rides. I enjoyed the rides I got, but I walked away being really irritated and ended up putting it at number 3 on my overall list. What I didn't know at the time, however, was that I would be placed in Central Florida for the final 2 internships of my degree. I am now halfway done with these internships, but I've been down there long enough to know that Iron Gwazi has earned this spot. In fact, it almost took number 1 on this list after I got a fresh new train at the beginning of December. Iron Gwazi is hands down the most relentless coaster that I have ever ridden. The first drop is the most aggressive, the pacing is elite, and the night rides are something out of this world. The only complaint that I have with Iron Gwazi is the same that I have with all RMCs, and that's the trains and restraints. I walk away with bruises and welts on my shins every time I marathon this beast, but they are so worth it. Iron Gwazi is king at Busch Gardens, Tampa, and it's not even close for me. I'm definitely going to get around to my in-depth Iron Gwazi review in the near future. Stay tuned. Number 1 is Velocicoaster at Islands of Adventure, maintaining its throne from last year. Up until a couple of weeks ago, I honestly thought Velocicoaster was untouchable. I gave Iron Gwazi multiple opportunities to dethrone Velocicoaster, including getting night rides on both in the same night. But I returned to Islands of Adventure one last time the week before I headed home for the holidays, and Velocicoaster stamped its spot at number 1. After launching out of the first tunnel, I was immediately reminded of the immersive theming surrounding me on all sides. Perhaps most notably, I realized that my shins weren't hurting. At all. I could enjoy this ride 100% pain-free, and take in all of the theming around me at my favorite park that I've ever visited. Velocicoaster has 2 solid launches, with the second hitting much harder than the first. The ride is incredibly smooth, and has 2 of my favorite elements with its top hat and Mosasaurus roll. I did an entire video on my love for this coaster that I will be linking on screen, so be sure to check it out after this video if you haven't already. Velocicoaster is king for me once again in 2022, and looking forward to my plans for next year. It just might stay there for a while. Thank you all for watching. Those are my top 25 coasters as of the end of 2022. What do you think about my rankings? Be sure to let me know in the comments below, as well as what your rankings look like. If you haven't already, be sure to drop the video a like, and subscribe to the channel as well for more roller coaster and theme park content just like this. If you want to follow me on Instagram as well, then you can find me there at Dr_Coaster. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.